Who was Ruth? A Moabite widow, living in a land far from Israel, whose life would forever alter the course of history. A woman, seemingly ordinary, yet marked by an extraordinary decision. She left her people, her homeland, and her past to follow a path shaped by faith, love, and a destiny she could never have foreseen. Her story begins in Moab, a place of struggle and sorrow, but it doesn't end there. Ruth's loyalty to her mother-in-law, Naomi, would lead her to Bethlehem, where her journey of faith unfolded into something far greater than anyone could imagine. A foreigner, an outsider, Ruth's name would be written into the lineage of Israel's greatest king, David. And from David, her bloodline would reach the Messiah, Jesus Christ. Ruth's life teaches us about the power of loyalty, the strength of faith, and the resilience of the human spirit. She stands as a beacon of hope and grace, a reminder that sometimes the most humble among us carry the greatest legacies. Her story transcends time, speaking to us of love that defies borders, faith that overcomes hardship, and courage that paves the way to God's purpose. This is the story of Ruth, one of the most important women in the Bible, whose faithfulness would ripple through the ages, touching lives far beyond her own. Bethlehem, the house of bread, a place once fertile and full of life, now ravaged by famine. The land, once bountiful, now lay cracked and barren beneath the relentless sun. The people of Bethlehem, Israel's chosen, were starving. Hunger clung to them like a shadow, and hope seemed to wither with each passing day. Among those facing this harsh reality was a man named Elimelech, his wife Naomi, and their two sons, Mahlon and Chilion. Their hearts heavy with sorrow, they made the painful decision to leave the land of their fathers. The famine had stolen from them the security they once knew. It had taken their harvest, their joy, and now it would take them far from home. For Naomi, the journey to Moab was more than just a departure from Bethlehem. It was the breaking of a bond, a severing of ties with the land of her people. Elimelech led them toward Moab, a foreign land whose gods and customs were unfamiliar, even hostile to the faith of Israel. Yet, driven by hunger and the need to survive, they had little choice but to leave. Moab, a land whose people had long been considered enemies of Israel, a place that stood apart from the promises of Yahweh. But now, it was a place of refuge, however uneasy. Naomi's heart wrestled with the weight of leaving, knowing that she would no longer be among her people, her God. But there was no food left in Bethlehem. No other way to survive. Naomi's pain ran deep, as did the longing for the life they were leaving behind. Yet even in her sorrow, there remained a flicker of hope, hope that somewhere, far from the famine-ridden land of Israel, her family might find the means to survive. She placed her trust in her husband's decision, in the belief that, in Moab, they would find sustenance. But as they made their way further from Bethlehem, the differences between their homeland and this new place began to weigh on Naomi's mind. Moab was a land of foreign gods, a people whose ways were not her own. To Naomi, Moab was not just foreign soil. It was a world where Yahweh's presence seemed distant. The people of Moab worshipped Chemosh, a god unlike the God of Israel. Their customs were strange, their ways different. Naomi's heart ached with the knowledge that her family was leaving behind not only their land but the covenant promises of Yahweh. Yet, in the face of famine, survival demanded they go. In Moab, Naomi and her family would find food. They would find shelter. But it was not home. It was not the land of promise, and every day, Naomi felt the weight of that distance. As they settled into this foreign land, Naomi must have wondered what the future would hold. She must have questioned whether they would ever return to Bethlehem, whether Yahweh had abandoned them in their hour of need. Years passed in Moab. The land provided what Bethlehem could not: food, shelter, and a measure of stability. Mahlon and Chilion, now grown, took wives from the women of Moab, Ruth and Orpah. These Moabite women, though foreign to the ways of Israel, would become central figures in Naomi's life. But Naomi's heart could never fully rest in Moab. For though they had found a way to survive, something had been lost. The bond with the land of Israel, with the faith of her people, felt as distant as ever. And so, Ruth enters the story. A Moabite woman whose heart was bound to this foreign land, yet whose destiny would lead her far beyond it. Ruth, though unaware of it, was about to embark on a journey that would change her life, Naomi's life, and the course of history itself. But Moab was not to be Naomi's final refuge. It was a temporary place of survival, but it would soon become a place of deep sorrow. For Elimelech, Naomi's husband, would not live to see his family prosper in this foreign land. His death left Naomi a widow in a strange country, and soon after, both of her sons, Mahlon and Chilion, would die as well. Now, Naomi was alone. Alone in a land not her own, without her husband, without her sons. All that remained were her daughters-in-law, Ruth and Orpah, two women who had also tasted the bitterness of widowhood. In the midst of Naomi's anguish, a new decision would soon need to be made. The news had spread, famine no longer gripped Bethlehem. The house of bread was once again providing for its people, and Naomi's heart turned back to her homeland. She had no choice but to return. With her heart set on returning to Bethlehem, Naomi's story was about to take another turn. But she would not make this journey alone. Though she urged her daughters-in-law to remain in Moab, to return to their families and their gods, one woman would refuse to leave Naomi's side. One woman would make a choice that would echo through the generations. And that woman was Ruth. On the road from Moab to Bethlehem, two women walk side by side. The dust rises with each step, and the weight of the journey presses on their hearts. But for one of these women, this path is more than a journey home. It is the beginning of a life-altering decision. Ruth, a Moabite widow, has chosen to leave behind everything she has ever known. She is walking into the unknown, driven by love, loyalty, and a faith that transcends borders. Naomi had urged Ruth to stay. She had told her to return to her people, to her homeland, to the gods she once served. Naomi, broken by the loss of her husband and sons, could not see the path ahead clearly. She believed Ruth would be better off in Moab, among her own people, where she could rebuild her life. But Ruth's heart had already chosen a different path, a path defined not by self-preservation, but by love and loyalty. And Ruth said, "Do not urge me to leave you or to turn back from following you. Where you go, I will go. Where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord deal with me, be it ever so severely, if even death separates you and me." With those words, Ruth made a pledge that would echo through the ages. It was a declaration of loyalty, not just to Naomi, but to Naomi's people and, more importantly, to Naomi's God. In this moment, Ruth was not merely offering comfort to her mother-in-law. She was stepping into the covenant of Israel, abandoning the gods of her people, and embracing the faith of Yahweh, the God of Israel. Ruth's words were more than a promise. They were a vow, a covenant of love and faithfulness. She had no assurance of what the future held. There were no guarantees that life in Bethlehem would be better than the hardship she had known. But Ruth was not driven by what was practical or safe. She was driven by faith. She chose the unknown, trusting in the God of Naomi, a God she had come to believe in through Naomi's life. Ruth's decision was not an easy one. She was leaving behind more than just a land. She was leaving behind her family, her culture, her gods, everything that had once defined her. In Moab, Ruth had roots, a past. But her love for Naomi and her newfound faith in Yahweh had taken hold of her heart, and that love compelled her forward, away from Moab, toward Bethlehem. The courage it took for Ruth to make that choice cannot be overstated. She was stepping into a foreign land where she would always be seen as an outsider, a widow with no status or wealth. But she walked in faith, trusting that Yahweh, the God of Naomi, would somehow make a way. It is in this moment that Ruth's faith truly shines. She was not born into the covenant of Israel, yet her loyalty and faith surpassed that of many who were. Ruth, the Moabite, was stepping into the grand story of God's redemption. She had chosen a path of selfless love, a love that would soon draw the attention of Bethlehem and in time would find favor in the eyes of Boaz, a man of great honor and wealth. But before that future could unfold, Ruth had to walk this road, a road paved with uncertainty and risk. In Ruth's vow to Naomi, we see a picture of loyalty that transcends familial bonds. Ruth's love was not conditional. It was not based on what Naomi could offer her in return. Ruth's love was rooted in a deeper, spiritual connection. A commitment to walk with Naomi through whatever lay ahead, even if that meant suffering and death. This is why Ruth's story stands as one of the greatest examples of faithfulness in the Bible. She chose a path of love and devotion, not knowing where it would lead. Her courage was not born out of obligation or duty. It came from a heart filled with faith. Ruth's decision to follow Naomi is more than just a personal act of kindness. It is a symbol of unwavering trust in God's plan, even when that plan is unseen. Ruth, though a foreigner, became a model of faithfulness for all of Israel. Her commitment to Naomi and to Yahweh would set the stage for a remarkable future. A future that would include not only her redemption but the redemption of all Israel through her descendant, King David, and ultimately, the Messiah, Jesus Christ. As the road winds on, Ruth and Naomi walk together, bound not by blood, but by a love and faith that defy expectations. Ruth had left behind her homeland, her family, and her gods. She had embraced the unknown, trusting in a future guided by the God of Israel. It was a future she could not see, but her faith sustained her steps. Ruth's story is a reminder that sometimes, the greatest acts of faith are the ones that require us to leave behind everything we know and trust in the path that God sets before us. Where you go, I will go. Where you stay, I will stay. Those words, spoken in love, echo through the centuries, reminding us that true faith is not bound by place or circumstance. It is bound by love, loyalty, and a trust in God's greater plan. Bethlehem, once a land left behind, now the home Naomi returns to in sorrow and loss. The town has not changed much, but Naomi has. The years in Moab, the grief, the loneliness, they have left their mark on her. Naomi, once filled with hope, now returns empty. And at her side is Ruth, the woman who refused to leave her, the foreigner who walked beside her every step of the way. Ruth, a Moabite, a widow, now stands in the heart of Israel, a stranger in a land where she does not belong, yet where she will soon find her place. Ruth has come to Bethlehem not as a guest, but as a laborer. There is no inheritance waiting for her, no home to claim. Instead, Ruth must work in the fields, gleaning what little remains after the harvesters have passed. In Israel, this practice was a provision for the poor, a way for widows, orphans, and foreigners to gather the leftover grains so they would not starve. And so, with humility, Ruth begins her labor. She bends low to gather the grain, her hands working tirelessly in the hot sun. She does this not only for herself but for Naomi, whose heart is still heavy with grief. In these fields, Ruth's humility shines. She has left behind her life in Moab, her family, her gods, her past, and has taken on the work of a servant in a foreign land. But there is no bitterness in her heart. Instead, there is a quiet resolve. Ruth's faith and love for Naomi drive her forward, even in the face of hardship. She bends to the earth, gathering the grain, knowing that this humble labor is what will sustain them. She is a woman of great strength, but it is a strength that is born of love, not pride. Boaz, a man of wealth, influence, and great generosity. He is respected by all in Bethlehem, not only for his success but for his character. Boaz's fields are plentiful, and his workers trust him as a man who cares for those under his charge. But today, as he looks across his fields, his eyes fall upon a woman unlike any other. He sees Ruth, the Moabite, working among the gleaners. Her clothes are worn, her hands calloused, yet there is something about her, something that captures his attention. Boaz does not recognize Ruth, but he senses there is more to her than meets the eye. He turns to his overseer, the man in charge of the reapers, to learn more about this stranger who works so diligently in his fields. And the overseer replied, "She is the Moabite who returned with Naomi from Moab. She has been working here since morning, without rest, gathering what she can to sustain herself and Naomi." Boaz listens carefully. This is the woman who has stayed by Naomi's side, the woman who left her homeland to care for her mother-in-law in a foreign land. Boaz, moved by her story and her loyalty, decides to act. His heart is stirred with compassion for Ruth, and he knows that her labor deserves more than mere survival. She deserves kindness, protection, and honor. In that moment, Boaz extends more than just protection to Ruth, he extends dignity. He calls her daughter, a term of respect and care, and offers her a place among his workers, ensuring her safety and comfort. He sees her not as a foreigner, not as a widow, but as someone worthy of honor. Ruth, overwhelmed by his kindness, bows low before him. Boaz's words speak to more than just Ruth's immediate needs. He sees her faith, her courage, and her sacrifice. And in his blessing, he acknowledges that Ruth has not merely come to Bethlehem seeking survival, she has come seeking refuge under the wings of Yahweh, the God of Israel. Boaz's prayer for Ruth is not only a blessing of material provision but a recognition of the greater protection she now seeks, a protection that comes from God himself. Ruth, though humbled by Boaz's generosity, remains aware of her status. She knows she is a foreigner, a Moabite, and yet Boaz's words have given her a place of honor. She, who came to glean the leftovers of the harvest, now finds herself invited into the protection and provision of a man of great standing. Boaz's kindness is not merely an act of generosity, it is a reflection of God's grace, extended to Ruth through this encounter. In ancient Israel, the law of the kinsman redeemer held deep significance. It was more than just a rule. It was a sacred duty, rooted in the covenant that bound the people of Israel to God and to one another. When a man died without leaving behind a male heir, it was the responsibility of the nearest relative, the kinsman redeemer, to marry the widow, ensuring that the family's name and inheritance would not be lost. The role of the kinsman redeemer was one of honor, of selflessness, and of commitment to preserving the legacy of the deceased. For Ruth, a foreigner and widow with no inheritance of her own, this custom represented more than just tradition. It was her only hope for a future, her only chance to provide security for herself and for Naomi, the woman she had vowed to protect. Ruth knew the weight of what she was asking, and yet, with courage born from both love and faith, she was willing to take that step. As the evening drew near, Ruth's heart must have raced with anticipation. Boaz had already shown her great kindness, allowing her to glean in his fields and ensuring her protection among his workers. But now, Ruth would seek something far greater. She would seek the protection that only a kinsman redeemer could provide. This was no small request. To seek the shelter of Boaz's protection, to ask him to fulfill this role, was to place herself in a position of great vulnerability. She was not merely asking for his generosity, she was asking for his commitment, his willingness to step into the role of redeemer, to take her as his wife, and to preserve the name of Naomi's family. The bond between Ruth and Boaz had already begun to grow, rooted in mutual respect and admiration. Boaz had seen Ruth's loyalty to Naomi, her unwavering dedication to a woman not of her own blood, and her quiet strength in the face of overwhelming adversity. But this moment, this step, would change everything. That night, under the cover of darkness, Ruth took the boldest step of her life. She made her way to the threshing floor, where Boaz would sleep after a long day of winnowing the barley. This was the place where Ruth would make her plea, where she would humbly seek the protection of a man who had shown her nothing but kindness and respect. As she approached, the weight of her request must have pressed heavily upon her heart. When Ruth reached Boaz, she did not shout her request from afar. Instead, in keeping with her character, one of humility and quiet strength, she came to him in the stillness of the night. She uncovered his feet and lay down, a gesture of submission and respect. This act, though unfamiliar to us, was a culturally significant symbol in ancient Israel. By uncovering his feet and laying at them, Ruth was asking Boaz to take her under his protection, to cover her with his garment, a metaphor for the protection and provision she sought as a widow. The night was still, and as Boaz stirred from his sleep, he was startled to find a woman lying at his feet. His heart must have skipped a beat as he asked, "Who are you?" The question, simple as it may seem, carried with it the weight of everything that would come next. "I am your servant, Ruth," she replied. Ruth did not come to him demanding anything. She came as a servant, humbly seeking what only Boaz could provide. But then, with boldness rooted in faith, she spoke the words that would change the course of her life. "Spread the corner of your garment over me, since you are a kinsman redeemer." In these words, Ruth was asking for more than shelter. She was asking Boaz to fulfill his role as her redeemer, to take her as his wife, and to protect her and Naomi from the uncertainty and hardship that awaited them without a redeemer. This was an act of courage that defied the conventions of her time. Ruth, a foreigner, a widow, had come to a man of great wealth and status, asking him to take her under his wing. But she did not come in desperation, she came in faith. Boaz, surprised by her request, could have easily rejected her. He could have turned her away, dismissing her as nothing more than a poor widow from a foreign land. But Boaz was a man of great character, and his response reflected the respect and admiration he had for Ruth. "The Lord bless you, my daughter," he said, his voice filled with warmth and kindness. "This kindness is greater than that which you showed earlier. You have not run after the younger men, whether rich or poor." Boaz saw Ruth's request not as an imposition, but as an act of loyalty and kindness. He recognized that Ruth could have sought a younger man, someone perhaps more suited to her age, but instead, she had come to him, an older man, because he was the one who could fulfill the role of kinsman redeemer. Ruth's heart was not driven by wealth or status. It was driven by her love for Naomi and her commitment to the covenant promises of Israel. Boaz, in turn, honored her courage and faith. He assured her that he would do everything in his power to redeem her and Naomi's family, but there was one obstacle that stood in the way. There was another man, a closer relative, who had the first right to redeem the family's land and take Ruth as his wife. Boaz, ever the man of integrity, promised Ruth that he would go to this man and settle the matter. "Stay here for the night," Boaz said gently. "And in the morning, if he wants to redeem, let him redeem. But if he is not willing, as surely as the Lord lives, I will do it." In that moment, Ruth's heart must have been filled with both relief and anxiety. Relief, because Boaz had not rejected her request. Anxiety, because the outcome was still uncertain. But even in the face of this uncertainty, there was hope. Boaz's words were a promise that he would fight for her, that he would do everything in his power to ensure her protection. As the dawn approached, Boaz acted with discretion, ensuring that Ruth's visit to the threshing floor would not be misunderstood by the people of the town. He sent her away before anyone could see her, but not before filling her shawl with barley, a gift that symbolized his provision for her and Naomi in the days to come. As Ruth made her way back to Naomi, her heart must have been filled with a mixture of emotions. She had taken a bold step, placing herself in a vulnerable position, but she had done so out of love and faith. And now, the outcome rested in the hands of Boaz and the unknown relative who held the first right to redeem. When Ruth returned to Naomi, she told her everything that had happened. Naomi, wise and full of hope, reassured Ruth that Boaz would not rest until the matter was settled. "Wait, my daughter," Naomi said, "until you find out what happens. For the man will not rest until the matter is settled today." And so Ruth waited, her future hanging in the balance, but her heart anchored in the faithfulness of the man she had come to trust. Boaz, the kinsman redeemer, would now take the steps necessary to fulfill the role that only he could fill. The bond between Ruth and Boaz had been sealed not just by words, but by a shared understanding of loyalty, honor, and faith. In the ancient world of Israel, the city gate was more than just an entrance to the town. It was the heart of legal proceedings, a public forum where disputes were resolved, and important transactions took place in the presence of witnesses. Boaz knew this was where he had to go. He knew that the future of Ruth, Naomi, and their family's legacy hung in the balance, and it was here, at the gate, that the final decision would be made. Ruth's redemption was not just a matter of marriage, it was a matter of preserving the land and the name of Elimelech, Naomi's deceased husband. According to the law, the closest male relative had the first right to redeem the land and marry Ruth, ensuring that the family's inheritance would not be lost. But Boaz was not the closest relative. There was another man who held the right of redemption before him. Boaz's heart must have been heavy with anticipation as he sat at the gate, waiting for the other kinsman redeemer to arrive. The outcome was uncertain. Would the man claim the right to redeem, or would Boaz be given the opportunity to take Ruth as his wife and preserve Naomi's family line? The stakes were high, and the tension palpable. When the other kinsman arrived, Boaz called him over. The elders of the town gathered around them, prepared to witness the negotiation that was about to unfold. Boaz began by presenting the facts. Naomi, who had returned from Moab, was selling the piece of land that had belonged to her husband, Elimelech. Boaz explained that as the closest relative, the man had the first right to redeem the land. If he chose to do so, the land would remain in Elimelech's family, and the inheritance would be preserved. At first, the man seemed eager. The opportunity to acquire more land was appealing, a chance to expand his own holdings and increase his wealth. But Boaz was not finished. He knew there was more at stake than just the land. He continued, telling the man that with the land came the responsibility of marrying Ruth, the widow of Mahlon, Naomi's son. By marrying Ruth, the man would be obligated to raise up an heir for the family of Elimelech, ensuring that the family's name would not disappear from Israel. At this, the other kinsman hesitated. The idea of redeeming the land had been attractive, but the added responsibility of marrying Ruth and preserving the family's name complicated matters. To marry Ruth meant dividing his inheritance and altering his family's future. The weight of the obligation became clear, and the man realized he could not redeem the land without jeopardizing his own family's interests. "I cannot redeem it," he said, relinquishing his right to Boaz. In that moment, Boaz knew that the path was clear. He would redeem the land, and he would take Ruth as his wife. The weight of responsibility was great, but Boaz had long ago recognized the value of Ruth, her faithfulness, her courage, and her love for Naomi. He saw not only the land but the future that lay ahead, one that would be blessed by God's provision and grace. Boaz stood before the elders and the witnesses at the gate, declaring his intention. He would redeem the land of Elimelech, and he would marry Ruth. He removed his sandal, a symbolic act in the culture of ancient Israel, signifying the transfer of redemption rights. The witnesses nodded in agreement, affirming that the transaction had been made. "Today you are witnesses," Boaz proclaimed, "that I have bought from Naomi all the property of Elimelech, Chilion, and Mahlon. I have also acquired Ruth the Moabite, Mahlon's widow, as my wife, in order to maintain the name of the dead with his property, so that his name will not disappear from among his family or from his hometown." The elders and witnesses blessed Boaz, recognizing the honor and integrity of his actions. They praised Ruth as well, comparing her to the great women of Israel who had come before, those who had built up the house of Israel. Boaz had not only secured the future of Elimelech's family, but he had also embraced Ruth, the foreigner, the widow, and given her a place of honor in the community. The marriage of Boaz and Ruth was more than just a personal union. It was a symbol of God's redemptive plan for his people. Through Boaz, the kinsman redeemer, Ruth had been brought into the covenant community of Israel. Her faithfulness to Naomi, her willingness to leave behind her homeland and embrace the God of Israel, had led her to this moment of blessing. For Ruth, the journey from Moab to Bethlehem had been filled with uncertainty, hardship, and risk. But now, as she stood beside Boaz, she could see the faithfulness of God's hand in her life. She, the Moabite widow, had been redeemed. Her future was secure, not only in the present but for generations to come. The marriage of Boaz and Ruth was a cause for celebration, not just for them but for all of Bethlehem. The people rejoiced, for they knew that this union was blessed by God. And through this marriage, a new chapter in Israel's history would begin, a chapter that would lead to the greatest king Israel would ever know. Ruth's legacy did not end with her marriage to Boaz. In fact, her story was only beginning. Ruth and Boaz's union was blessed with the birth of a son, Obed. Obed would grow to be the father of Jesse, and Jesse, in turn, would become the father of David, the greatest king in Israel's history. Through Ruth, a foreigner from the land of Moab, God was weaving together the lineage of the Messiah, the one who would redeem not only Israel but the entire world. Ruth, the Moabite widow, became a part of Israel's greatest legacy. And through her story, we see that no one is beyond the reach of God's redeeming love. So, as you go forward, ask yourself, how can I embody the same faith, loyalty, and courage that Ruth displayed? How can I extend love and kindness to those around me, even when it's difficult, even when the path ahead is unclear? Let Ruth's story remind you that the choices you make today, whether in love, in kindness, or in faith, have the power to shape not just your own life, but the lives of others, for generations to come.